Bendegan wasn't always a wizard. In fact, for most of his life, he was just an ordinary dwarf of no real importance. He spent most of his days climbing apple trees and collecting leaves and grubs. By age 19, he had such a unique collection of leaves that he was offered a trade by a passing traveler. The traveler offered a set of dusty old books in exchange for the many colorful leaves. Having no attachment to the leaves, Bendegan jumped at the trade and took the books back to his favorite apple tree, where he began to look them over with wonder. There were 14 books in all: alchemy, fairy tales, histories, but the one that caught Bendegan's eye was a book entitled How to Become a Wizard, and this is where our story really begins. It took Bendegan a mere few decades to properly become a wizard. There were several stages of the learning process. First, he had to fashion a wand from his favorite tree, apple of course. Second, he had to master the spellcaster's language, and finally, and perhaps what took the longest, he actually had to execute the spells and wizardry from memory. By the time Bendegan was ready to call himself a true wizard, he had aged 53 years, and he mostly used his magic wand as a cane to help him walk. One morning, he awoke to find that it was still sort of dark outside, even though it was 10 in the morning. He checked the sky and noticed that there were thousands of clouds, but there was no sign of the sun. He became very worried, as the sun had never failed to shine in Mantos. After 3 days without sunshine, Bendegan decided that he should go and speak to a friend about this right away. The problem with spending all that time practicing to become a wizard was that he hadn't made much time to make any friends. He did, however, know of one person who lived in the Dufflands whom he thought may be able to help Bendegan, usually packed light for a trip, and the journey to the Dufflands was no different. He grabbed a knapsack and threw in his elderberry pipe, a blanket in case he got cold, and 7 apples from his favorite tree. The Dufflands were a day's walk from his cottage in Pan's Keep, and he wasn't even sure if he would be able to find the person he was looking for when he arrived. The journey was rough and tiring on an old dwarf, but Bendegan passed the time humming to himself and collecting leaves. He had not collected leaves since he was a teenager, and decided that now was as good a time as any to pick it up again. 4 apples, a long walk, and a night's sleep later, Bendegan arrived in the Dufflands. Inside the barricade of trees was a beautiful place called the Marsh Meadow, where all kinds of exotic plants and delicious fruits grew year-round. Bendegan found the first hollow oak in the center of the Marsh Meadow and knocked 3 times. "Joonbudee?" Bendegan asked. "That's my name," the being responded. "I came to seek you out. I'm hoping that you can tell me what happened to the sun. It has been hidden by clouds for days now." Joonbudee put his hand on his chin and thought for a moment. Eventually, he spoke. "The Butterbies were passing through 2 days past and spoke of the missing sun. They said that the evil Groch has cast a spell over the sky and hidden the sun." Bendegan had never heard of the evil Groch, but he was not very pleased to learn of another wizard in Mantos, and an evil one at that. "Joonbudee, we have to do something about this. Without the sun, the plants and the flowers won't grow. The animals and people will die without the food and warmth, and it will be dark and cold forever. We can't let that happen." Joonbudee thought for a moment, and he put his hand over his chin as he looked at all of the beautiful flowers and animals in the marsh meadow. Finally, he replied, "I will help you." Bendegan the Wizard and Joonbudee, who is a tall, green, friendly, and furry beast, decided that the best thing to do was to find the evil Groch and break his spell. The problem was that they didn't know how to find him. Joonbudee suggested that they visit the Butterbies in the Whispering Willows, only a few miles from the marsh. This made sense to Bendegan, since the Butterbies were the ones who first told Joonbudee of the evil Groch's spell. The 2 of them left the marsh meadow and traveled towards the Whispering Willows, but the trip was not as sure-footed and straightforward as they would have hoped. Within the hour, they became aware that something was amiss. "Joonbudee, I believe we are being followed," Bendegan whispered as they continued on their path. Joonbudee couldn't help but look behind him, but he saw nothing. This went on for 10 minutes or so, where Joonbudee would quickly snap his head around, but then the follower would disappear out of sight. The 2 of them were sure that someone was following them, but as the time passed, they were growing confident that they were not in any danger. "You can come out now," Bendegan called out to no one in particular, but no one appeared. Joonbudee was flustered and finally gave in. "Why don't you just use one of your spells?" he asked. Bendegan smiled. "I hadn't even thought of that." He waved his wooden wand and chanted Hinum Hunnum Hum, and suddenly out of thin air a girl appeared right in front of them. "Who are you?" Joonbudee asked. She was startled that they had caught her and quiet at first. Bendegan looked her over. She appeared to be about 14, with dark hair and a warrior of some sort, judging by the blade and the armor. Bendegan decided that they could use a warrior on their quest. "Do you know how to use that sword?" Bendegan asked her, already knowing the true answer. "I'll use it on you if you're not careful, wizard." The girl pulled her sword from its scabbard and pointed it at Bendegan's chin. "I had something else in mind." Bendegan reached into his knapsack and threw his last 3 apples into the air. The girl, without hesitation, sliced the apples 4 ways each before they fell to his feet. Joonbudee and Bendegan looked at the apples lying at their feet. "What is your name?" Bendegan asked. "Ammee," she replied, sheathing her sword. "Ammee, have you noticed that the dark clouds have blocked away the sun for several days now?" Bendegan asked, pointing upward. "Of course I have," she said. "The 2 of us are on a quest to break the spell that has hidden the sun, and we could use a warrior like you. Would you join us?" Ammee looked to the sky briefly and squeezed the locket around her neck, a locket Joonbudee had not noticed before. She nodded silently, and the 3 of them set out for the Whispering Willows. The Butterbies were the ancient beings of Mantos. The Noan scribes say that it was the Butterbies who first pollinated the marsh meadow and planted the entire Whispering Willows. They are small creatures, gifted in flight and wisdom, and they have never known enemies. Their wise council of elders plans the seasons and the gardens. The highest member of this council, Furge, was known to be stubborn in his ways and hard to approach. This was who Bendegan the Wizard, Joonbudee, the friendly, tall, green, and furry beast, and Ammee, the young female warrior with dark hair, a sword, and armor, would have to speak with in order to find the answers that they were seeking. As the 3 of them traveled on foot towards the Whispering Willows, they soon realized that the closer they got, the colder the air became. "I feel like we should turn back," Joonbudee thought out loud. Ammee smirked and drew her sword with a metallic scrape, gripping it with both hands. Bendegan looked side to side, knowing that they were exactly where they were supposed to be, but not sure how welcome they were. Suddenly, what little bit of light the willows had soon disappeared, leaving them in utter darkness. Joonbudee began to shiver in terror. "Don't be frightened, Joonbudee. My wand will light the way." Bendegan waved his wooden wand, and with a bit of dazzle-bazzle, his wand lit the forest, and there they were. Hundreds of Butterbies surrounded them, and for a moment Joonbudee smiled in relief, as the Butterbies had always been his friends. But now something was different. The Butterbies were stern-faced and held pikes. They looked very angry and worried. Ammee gripped her sword even tighter, but Bendegan was way ahead of her with his wand. "Hinum Hunnum Vam. What are you doing?" Ammee whispered. "I'm casting a spell of protection over us, and then I'm going to reason with them." Bendegan leaned on his wand and began to address the crowd. "Don't worry, my friends, we have come to help. You all know Joonbudee of the Marsh Meadow. This is the young warrior Ammee, and I am Bendegan the Wizard." Several of the Butterbies shrieked in terror at the word wizard, and Bendegan quickly realized why. "I am Bendegan the Good Wizard," he corrected. The Butterbies lifted their pikes to their sides, and a sense of relief washed through the crowd. Ammee put her sword away, realizing that the danger had subsided. "We have come to speak with Furge of the High Council." "Is there anyone who can take us to him?" Bendegan asked in his most polite of tones. The Butterbies moved like mysterious clockwork, shuffling from the surrounding circle into a 2-sided linear path, leading them directly to the council chamber. It was a short walk, but without help in the maze of the Whispering Willows, they may have never found it. When they arrived, they were announced to the council by Yano, the oldest of all the Butterbies. "O great Furge, your counsel is requested by Bendegan the Good Wizard and his companions, Joonbudee of the Marsh Meadow, and Ammee the Warrior." Furge sat upon a throne of twisted roots as 40 Butterbies stood on either side of the council chamber. He squinted at them as if they were much farther away than they were, as they strode up to the podium. "Speak," he said, sounding as if his mouth was full of spit. Bendegan explained the situation as best he could, and how the 3 of them came to be in his presence. When he was finished, Furge sat on his throne, seemingly unimpressed by the events that had transpired in Mantos. Finally, he leaned up and mumbled through trembling lips, "Although I am of the belief that my people are worrying over nothing, and that our sun will shine tomorrow, I am reasonable, and I will offer you what I can. The Butterbies have protected a small artifact for centuries that may be of some help to you." It is called the Stone of Pulvar, and it is quite powerful. It can eliminate any magic or danger of nature, but you can use it only once. Bendegan looked to his companions and back to Ferge with a raised eyebrow. Do you know how to find Grotch? Ferge leaned back in his chair and his trembling lips curled up into an insidious grin. Of course. He resides in the Lost Mountain. The whole room gasped, and suddenly Bendegan, Joonbudee, and Ammee were afraid, though they didn't know why. Ferge stood up to leave the council chamber, but just before he left, he turned around and said, "The only way to get there is through the Desperos." 50 miles east of the Whispering Willows sits a wasteland unlike anything else in Mantos. Centuries ago, the Bouvians burned the once peaceful town of Ronik and left it to rot. Since that time, frightening creatures, black tar, and sludge had taken it over. Henceforth, it was known as the Desperos, and it was no place for three unlikely travelers: Bendegan the Wizard, Joonbudee, the tall, green, friendly, and furry beast, and Ammee, the young, dark-haired female warrior with armor and a sword, reached the wasteland after 2 days on foot. The Butterbies had given them apples, honey, and bread for their journey, as well as the Stone of Pulvar that had been under their protection for over 1,000 years. Yet they were still ill-equipped for the Desperos. "Step lightly, my friends. 1,000 terrors could fall around us," Bendegan croaked as they entered the wastes. Bloodbats began circling above them in packs, waiting to pounce at any moment. "I'm ready for anything," Ammee announced, brave as ever. "I'm not," Joonbudee said, hiding behind her. Soon the air grew cold and the ground wasn't as solid as before. Bendegan grabbed his wand and started to cast a spell, but it was too late. The ground had swallowed them. "It's some kind of quicksand," Ammee shouted, struggling to free herself. "We are sinking fast," Joonbudee yelled to Bendegan. Bendegan stayed calm and looked around for a solution, but everything was starting to look dark and helpless. Above them, the blood bats continued to circle and squawk, and then came the most frightening noise that they had ever heard. Lightning lit up the sky in all directions, and an evil, gigantic face appeared in the clouds. It was Grotch. "So you have come for me? Good luck, you'll never escape the wasteland, ha ha ha!" Grotch disappeared from the sky and the land grew dim once again. Joonbudee tried to reach for the nearest tree limb, but it was no use. "We're not going to make it," Ammee gritted. They were up to their necks in quicksand. Bendegan was on the verge of panic, but he was more worried for his friends that he'd brought into this mess. It was all his fault and he had to do something. Even though he was neck-deep in quicksand, he found that he could still reach his hand into his pocket. "I'm going to use the stone," he said. "What?" Ammee yelled.
"How will we defeat Grotch?"
"We're not going to defeat anyone if we don't live through this," Bendegan shouted. He gripped the Stone of Pulvar tight just as he'd been instructed, and said the ancient words Punam Vinum Unum Venum, and light surrounded them, followed by a loud hissing sound and finally a crackling boom. The dead, twisted trees of the wasteland were covered in tar and mud, and the bloodbats had disappeared along with the howling of the sinister creatures that had been crawling around the Desperos. It was possible that whatever power the stone had conjured had also eliminated Bendegan and his allies. But at the end of the twisted tree line, out stumbled Bendegan, Ammee, and Joonbudee. "I can't believe we survived that," Ammee huffed as she brushed the sand off of her armor. "That was just the beginning," Bendegan said, pointing his wand towards the Lost Mountain. Joonbudee stared at the massive summit, 3,000 meters in height with a winding wooden stairway that led to what appeared to be an opening, and sat down on the nearest rock. "We can't do this, it's too far and we've already wasted the stone." Joonbudee sighed and he held his head in his hands. Ammee walked over and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder to comfort him. "We didn't waste it, Joonbudee. We're alive," Ammee reminded him. Bendegan could see that his friends were discouraged, but they hadn't seen real wizardry yet. He took his wand and pointed it towards the wooden steps and spoke the words, Hinum Humnum Mujum. The wooden steps began to dislodge and swirl in the air as he continued to point and direct his wand. Joonbudee and Ammee stood up and watched in disbelief as Bendegan manipulated the wooden steps and fashioned them into a catapult. "Wow, you really are a wizard," Ammee said with awe as she climbed inside the catapult. Bendegan soon joined her and Joonbudee smiled, realizing his place in the matter. He pulled the spring of the catapult back and quickly hopped inside as Ammee hit the lever with her sword, and it shot them into the air directly towards the opening at the top of the Lost Mountain. For a moment, it looked like they were going to shoot over the top of the peak, but they shifted just in time to fall right into the opening. The creviced insides of the mountain were lit by thousands of candles lining the walls, but a chill filled the air as they crept further in. After a few minutes, the walls opened upon a giant empty room, perhaps a room as tall as the mountain itself. And then they heard a familiar voice. The evil Groch's voice echoed through the corridors of the mountain. "You are quite powerful, wizard. I'm glad that you brought your friends." "I have one too, ha ha ha." The candles burned out with a gust of wind just as metal doors fell from the ceiling and locked them in on three sides. They turned to run towards the only exit when they heard an awful roar, and then they saw a clawed foot, and then a sharp tail, and finally, there it was, 30 feet tall, a cumber beast. Cumber beasts were hairy, disgusting creatures who roamed the darkest corners of Mantos, causing terror and destruction wherever they went. In packs, they were unstoppable forces of fear, but three trapped travelers might hold one off for at least 3 or 4 minutes. "Stay behind me, I'll cast a spell," Bendegan the Wizard ordered as he began to wave his wand. "What kind of spell do you have that can defeat a cumber beast?" Ammee, the dark-haired young girl with armor, asked, drawing her sword. I'm thinking. Bendegan sighed as his wand sparked, but no words came. Joonbudee, the tall, green, furry, and friendly beast, grabbed any rocks that he could find and hurled them at the beast, but it just angered it, and it lunged back at him. Ammee saw this as the opportunity that she needed. She leaped behind the cumber beast and swung her sword across the back of its leg. The beast roared and swung aimlessly, attempting to grab her, but its hulk made it slow and cumbersome. Joonbudee kept throwing rocks, and Ammee cut him again, this time on the arm. Bendegan leapt to the side of the beast and pointed his wand Hinam Joonmunyom, and sparks flew from its end into the beast as Ammee and Joonbudee stood back. Within seconds, the 30-foot beast was reduced to the size of a thimble and began to mildly irritate Joonbudee's pinky toe. The sight of the thimble-sized beast, who only seconds before had threatened their lives, made them all laugh hysterically, and for a moment, everything was applesauce. Seconds later, the candles in the room began to flicker and flame again, and lightning shot down from the ceiling. In a brief flash of light, a red, menacing being with wings on his back and 2 horns on his head appeared before them. It was Groch. "You may have defeated my pet, but now I will destroy you all," Groch hissed as he shot beams of light from his fingers. Joonbudee and Bendegan dodged the attack while Ammee tried to block it with her sword. The beam was too powerful, and her sword shattered into pieces. She stood in disbelief as Joonbudee charged Groch and knocked him to the floor, but his magic flung Joon to the ceiling like a straw man, knocking him out. Joonbudee lay motionless in the corner of the room as Ammee and Bendegan stood together. "What now?" Ammee whispered. "Why did you hide the sun, Groch? What's in it for you?" Bendegan asked, stalling for time as he searched his mind for the right spell. "You need never ask why evil does evilness, little man. It was time Mantos witnessed my true power, for I am the greatest sorcerer who ever lived." Groch hissed as he began to form a ball of light in his hands to eliminate Bendegan and Ammee once and for all. "You mean you were the greatest sorcerer who ever lived?" Bendegan said as he pointed his wand at Groch. "Hinam num hinam foe." Sparks flew from his wand toward Groch, capturing him as he stood motionless. "Off with you," Bendegan snapped as the light disappeared along with Groch. "You did it." Ammee squealed and hugged Bendegan as Joonbudee shook his head drearily and stood up. "Did we win?" he asked with woozy, droopy eyes. Bendegan turned to Joonbudee and smiled. "We sure did." Outside on the mountain summit, they decided to have a snack before heading back home. Joonbudee pulled the bread into 3 equal parts, and Bendegan handed everyone an apple. As they leaned against the cool mountainside and began to eat, the clouds dithered away and the sun burned bright and beautiful. They all looked on in amazement, happy to feel the warmth on their faces again. Bendegan chewed his apple and thought back to all of the little moments that had brought him to this point. He had seen the world, made friends, had a grand adventure, and defeated evil. Not bad for a little old wizard.